very few blue creatures that looked playable, as well as the fact that, like the spells like Thassa's Rebuff are just not as good as they look on paper as well. So.
Absolutely. Well, we are going to be underway. We see at turn 1, Brian is on the play. He leads off with a Breeding Pool, and then will be Judge's Familiar from Danny on the other side of the table.
Yeah, so this matchup is all about whether or not the control deck can stick an early threat, kind of like a Jace or a Cure to lock down the more important cards, and then follow that up with a Supreme Verdict. If he's able to do that, the Mono Blue Devotion is all about spewing their hand onto the table, and if he doesn't, apply enough pressure, Brian's going to be able to play things like Sphinx's Revelation and just removal him out of the game. But it's really difficult for the Mono Blue decks to actually play around Supreme Verdict because they can't counter it.
Sure, especially I know Game 1, Supreme Verdict is considered one of the strongest cards in this matchup.
Yeah.
We see Danny just playing headlong into that. Judge's Familiar into Frostburn Weird. Brian's running right now with just land drops.
Yeah, so one thing you actually noticed Brian doing, he had multiple Skylands in his opening hand along with the Breeding Pool, and what Brian did is since he was on the play, he opted to lead with the Shockland so he could get more information about what he wants to scry for with his new temples. That way, once he sees the turn 1 Judge's Familiar, he's like, oh, I need to dig specifically for Supreme Verdict and Jace, and then hopefully like later on in the game I'll find a Sphinx Revelation, and that's one thing that a lot of newer players do. They see, oh, this comes into play tapped all the time, I want to play it on turn 1, but then you look at the top card of the deck, it's like, oh, it's a Dissolve. Maybe I want that, maybe I don't, but then your opponent plays Judge's Familiar and you're like, that was awful. I don't want to draw that.
They're not just taplands, they're also kind of mini spells in a way.
Right. There's very little card selection in Standard, and the Skylands are definitely able to take hold of that, and I think that Brian's deck does a great job of doing that with so many Skylands, and hopefully, like when he starts playing things like Kiora, you'll see just how powerful the Skylands can be, because he goes like Kiora, draws a card, follows up with a Skyland, finds exactly what he needs next turn, like an Elspeth to cast or something like that. So.
Well, Danny that turn swung in with no fear of the 2 open mana with Frostburn Weird and Judge's Familiar, dealt 2 to Brian, and thanks to Judge's Familiar was able to safely just cast into a Nightveil Spectre. So now he has 3 creatures on the board. That's got to put a lot of pressure on Brian to sweep the board.
All right, now Brian's here. He can't really. He's ticking up Jace, but I think this is a pretty big mistake because. Oh no, it's actually. I apologize. I thought it was going to be able to do 5 damage to the Jace, but he can only do 4, so never mind.
Yeah, Danny can't actually kill the Jace this turn.
Yeah, I forgot the Jace actually invalidates the Judge's Familiar, and I was counting that as 1. But
right.
If he pumps the Frostburn Weird 3 times, he can hit it for 4 damage this turn. But he probably wants to try to hit a free card off the top of Brian's deck with the Nightveil Spectre, since he's not going to be able to kill the Jace. But there is value to putting Jace at 1, because then Brian's not able to dig for a Supreme Verdict next turn. Yeah.
Absolutely. So that we are back on Danny's board. The only play so far that Brian has had as that turn 4 Jace, it did tick up to 5. So we have Frostburn Weird, Judge's Familiar, Nightveil Spectre, plenty of blue mana. Really, though, it seems like what Danny wants to stick is something like a Thassa or a Jace or something that I guess wouldn't die to a Supreme Verdict here.
Right. Biden, I think, would be the best card for him here. He would only draw 1 card because he couldn't pump the Frostburn Weird after casting the Biden. But, yeah, it looks like he's hitting Jace for 3 and then hitting Brian for 1 and triggering the Nightveil Spectres.
Yeah, well, we'll see. It might be a hit for 4. No, you're absolutely right. He did play the land already this turn, though. So if he hits the land, he's going to be unable to cast it.
Right.
Doesn't matter, though. It's a Detention Sphere. Unable to cast it either way.
Yeah. So I think, he
already played a land.
Yeah, we figured it out. It's fine.
Brian is on top of it. So if you're Danny, you saw he thought about casting Judge's Familiar here. I mean, he's already going to get really blown out by Supreme Verdicts. Should he just keep casting things into it at this point?
Honestly, that's the problem with Mono Blue Devotion in this matchup. You actually you're in a lot of trouble if you do overextend and run Supreme Verdict, but against a Jace, if you're not able to put enough pressure on it, then you're going to end up losing to that. And right now it looks like Brian has a Last Breath in his hand, so he could actually has the option to +1 the Jace and then Last Breath the Frostburn Weird, while Danny can only pump it for 1. However, he opts to just tick down the Jace, look for a Supreme Verdict, which he found, and looks like he's probably just going to blow up the world, play Skyland, then follow that up with an Elspeth next turn if he has a 6th land.
Absolutely. He does have the Elspeth in hand, so Supreme Verdict does clear the board. Danny's not going to chance to cast the Sphere. Brian's going to use, as you said, another one of the temples, setting up his draws further.
Yep.
Imagine he's looking for land 6 so that he can just hit Elspeth.
Yeah, that makes sense. His hand looked like it was stacked already. Sphinx Revelation in there somewhere. I'm pretty sure I saw a Last Breath and the Elspeth. And then maybe another Sphinx's Revelation. His hand is a little hard to see. He keeps it tight-knit.
All right, so we're back. Now pressure is on Danny. He's only made a small dent into Brian's life total. It is still 20-16. He's got to assume there are some haymakers coming out of Brian's deck. The question is, how can he navigate those? Looks like he has another Night Vale and a Judge's Familiar.
Yeah, but I think he's stuck with the infamous domestication in his hand.
Oof, so
I could be wrong about it, but I
he
thought
does
I saw
have
it
one in the
earlier,
main, so it certainly is possible.
Yeah. It looks like his last 2 cards are Night Vale Spectre and an Unknown. I thought I saw the domestication earlier, so it could easily be that.
Yep, he's going to make Judge's Familiar and Thassa for the turn, so he gets a Thassa down while he has Brian tapped out, but matters not. Brian does have the Sphere for the Thassa.
Yeah. And more importantly, if Brian did have a 6th land here, if he were to just cast Elspeth, Danny has the potential to play Night Vale Spectre, make the Thassa unblockable, and just kill Elspeth. So regardless, it's probably just a better play to cast the Detention Sphere anyway. However, Brian didn't have the 6th land, so it was irrelevant.
All right. So Night Vale Spectre will get 1 point on Brian. Danny will follow up with, or Judge's Familiar will hit for 1. Danny will follow up with Night Vale Spectre. Yeah. And Brian still with a 5-card hand.
Yeah, it looks like he drew a Hallowed Fountain for the turn, so he has the option to cast Elspeth, but he also has some other stuff to do. Look, I don't know if he's got Trips Revelation in hand.
He's got at least one, and it does look like more. Hallowed Fountain's going to come into play tapped.
Okay, so he's probably just going to Last Breath the Night Vale Spectre, but this is actually an important thing to do. You always want to play removal spells on Mono Blue's upkeep or during like their attack phase, assuming that they have mana untapped already for things like Rapid Hybridization, because if you just main phase it and they Rapid Hybridization their Gain response, you get hit with a 3/3, and that's like 3 extra points that you just don't have for basically no reason.
All right, so the attack happens, and as right on cue, Brian will Last Breath the Night Vale Spectre. Puts Danny up to 24. He's going to take 1 off the Judge's Familiar. He's down to still a healthy 14 life.
Yep.
And Danny, if you look at the Rainer's hand, he plays a land. He has a Cyclonic Rift, I believe, is his last card there.
Yeah, he has Cyclonic Rift and Domestication, unfortunately.
So the Rift will buy him the Thassa for a turn if he wants it.
That's the real problem with Rift in this matchup, though, is that it's really hard to build up a board presence strong enough against a Supreme Verdict type deck where your Cyclonic Rift's bouncing Detention Sphere is good enough, because he really has to be able to put 14 points of damage on the board, overload Cyclonic Rift, and then untap and kill Brian before Brian's able to recast the Detention Sphere and really take back control of the game. But
Brian seizes the opening, though, so now that he has 6 lands, he has the board clear except for a 1/1 bird. Brian's going to go ahead and make Elspeth drop a 7th land, and the army of soldiers begins to assemble on his side.
Yeah, but luckily for Danny, the Cyclonic Rift can buy him a lot of time against Elspeth because the tokens will disappear completely. However, I think he's going to go a little more aggressive here, and I guess he's
grabbing Thassa.
He's hoping to peel Night Vale Spectre, I think, so that way he can play Night Vale Spectre and then make the Thassa unblockable and kill Elspeth for good. However,
it's probably one of his only ways to actually remove the Elspeth.
Yeah,
right?
but he's already been through 2 of his Night Vale Spectre, so it seems rather unlikely he's going to be able to have enough mana to do all these things.
Well, he's going to go for it. So he gets the Scry on upkeep.
Yep.
We'll see what he can do with it. Yeah, he's going to have to somehow activate it. He drew the card straight to hand, though.
It's Frostburn Weird, so he can Domestication a token and play Frostburn Weird, but I'm not sure if that's going to...
Well, if he does that, he'll have no mana to make the Thassa unblockable.
Exactly, and that's why I thought that maybe the Cyclonic Rift on the Detention Sphere, maybe you wait a few more turns, because you're at a pretty high life total. The Elspeth isn't really going to do that much damage, assuming that you're able to actually overload the Cyclonic Rift. But right now, Brian just gets to untap and recast the Detention Sphere, and Danny only got to scry 1, and he kept it on top. So that's basically like he spent 2 mana for Brian's 3 mana.
He spent 2 mana and basically gave Brian, and basically got the chance to ship a Frostburn Weird, which he then declined.
Right.
And that was what unless he lost a card for it. See 3 more tokens made by Elspeth. And Brian and Pierce start pulling away. We know he has a Revelation left in his hand.
Yeah.
I don't know if he even needs it to take the game, but it certainly gives him an insurance policy.
Right. I mean, Thassa's pretty powerful, and if Danny's able to turn it on here in the next turn or two, which he does have the Domestication, so he can potentially turn on this turn and then kill the Elspeth if Brian has nothing. We know for a fact Brian has something in Sphinx Revelation, but if he has a Counterspell, a Last Breath, or just a plethora of other cards, Danny's going to be in a lot of trouble.
Yeah. So we'll see what he goes for. With Domestication, it's almost just a card that he has to play onto something just for devotion.
Yeah, I mean, he might even want to play it on his own guy at some point in the match. If I guess he's obviously sideboarding it out, but it's just funny that he actually has a target, and it's a lowly 1/1 soldier of many.
All right, so the domestication that will do its important job of making Thassa active. So he'll make Thassa unblockable, and he's going to go for Elspeth.
Yeah, but now Brian can have Azorius Charm. He can have
any number
breath,
of white instants, but he has none, so the Elspeth actually is successfully defeated.
All right, so looks like he's going to rev here for X -1 to pay for Judge's Familiar, potentially. So, yeah, he's
going to draw. 4,
for
and it looks like he found pretty much the recipe he wants, a Supreme Verdict plus a replacement Elspeth.
Yeah, that's going to be game over. Danny's really low on resources. Brian just has a handful of gas. Looks like he does have at least one more Sphinx Revelation in hand, probably 2. Here's just a deal you 4 attack before he casts Supreme Verdict, and then follows that up with probably a Detention Sphere on the Thassa just to clear the board before he starts getting Elspeth active again.
All right, so we're kind of at that point where the Bant deck's going to pull away. Looking at the matchup, though, I want to, a lot of people, we've seen a lot of these blue-white versus mono-blue matchups. That certainly is nothing new. The Bant Walker's deck, in a lot of ways, plays like blue-white, but at least you said you were able to test with the deck a little, right?
Yeah.
So tell me about Kiora, or I guess the green in the deck.
So most importantly, I think green actually gives you a way to break in the mirror match. Mistcutter Hydra out of the sideboard is so phenomenal, and the only card in the mirror match that really trumps it is either they leave in Supreme Verdict, which is always bad, or they draw their Elspeth and you don't have a counterspell or like some way to stop it. I think that having that card also against mono blue is kind of just icing on the cake, because you actually do need a finisher against them sometimes if your Elspeths aren't good enough, or if they have like Cyclonic Rift or whatever. But
yeah, now we've had access. This is now blue-white decks pre-Born of the Gods they could have splashed green if they wanted to. Is it really just the mana's clearly a lot better now? You get a lot more temples.
Yeah, I mean, I actually think subtly the fact that you get the blue-white temple is really great for being able to splash a different color, because before we were having to play like weird guild gates that didn't really tap for the colors we need, but having the blue-white guild gate just makes the rest of your mana so much better that it's kind of like a trickle-down effect. It makes your entire mana base better, so that you're able to play more green sources without like too much of a drawback.
Well, after that Wrath, Brian was able to reload a bit. Completely. He played an Elspeth, has plussed it 2 turns. Danny, off the top of the deck, has had some decent draws. He's scryed into Tidebinder Mage and Nightveil Spectre, so Thassa is online again.
Yeah.
But Brian, with that Revelation in his hand that he's now casting for an additional 6 cards, still seems to be firmly in control.
Right. He's looking here for like an Azorius Charm or a Last Breath to turn off the Thassa. Actually, no, it looks like he already has the Azorius Charm in hand, so he's just digging for cards. And has the Azorius Charm to stop the attack, basically, because all he has to do is put Tidebinder Mage on top of the deck. That turns off the Thassa too. Elspeth stays at 6, untap. Can even cast Supreme Verdict if he wants to, so maybe even just put Thassa on top of the deck.
He's really just buying time to an Elspeth emblem.
Yeah. So yeah, he's actually going to let that Elspeth take 2 here. Puts Thassa on top. He's going to attack for 6. Deal 5 points of damage, cast Supreme Verdict, +1 the Elspeth again, and now he drew Dissolve, so he's just going to dissolve the Thassa, and that should be game over.
Yeah, certainly we're at that point where Brian just has a multitude of resources available to him.
That's Sphinx's Revelation.
The only win con you actually need.
Yeah.
No,
right. You have to play like an Elixir. So you have to play
something. Yeah.
They're not always going to concede to the 3rd Sphinx Revelation for 8+, so...
They want to see how you win.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, and here's the segment. All right, we can see our first look at Kiora. Granted, this isn't at the spot in the game where we're going to learn much about the Kiora. But against Mono Blue, so
would you
powerful,
say that it's
right?
over Kiora? I couldn't do Overkill and Kiora without...
Oh, man.
I was trying really hard.
So much fun. Yeah. Well, certainly,
You're at a loss for words.
I'm at a loss for words. I was going to try to come up with a pun for it.
Well, this game is really crashing down for Danny Strunk.
There we go.
I'm going to target...
All right.
Okay.
Kiora, though, I'm interested in how it plays in this matchup. I know it's a powerful card. We've seen it actually on camera a lot be really good in these decks. The question is, I'm not positive yet where it's good and where it's bad.
Okay, well, when you don't draw Sphinx Revelation, it's another great card to help you play catch-up. You can stall out their early threats, and then when they play a Thassa, you can prevent the Thassa from being able to like attack your Jace or your Kiora, and then using your Jace to like invalidate the rest of their threats. It's a really good combo with Jace because it allows you to keep their little guys in check and their one big guy in check. Now, if they have more than one big guy, that's when you just cast Supreme Verdict, you know.
Sure.
But, I mean, the deck is just full of so many good cards that often cards like Cure are going to be overshadowed when you're casting Sphinx Revelation for 6+. You know, then you untap, cast Cure. It's like, okay, well, what's this actually doing?
It's the late game card, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Eventually it outclasses everything.
Yeah, and Cure actually, I think, has a lot of added benefits against things like mono black control, where you can either choose to start ramping and drawing extra cards and really just like turbo fueling your late game, or if they don't have a hero's downfall within like the top 3 cards or something, you can just +1 and target like their Mutavault, or if they just have Desecration Demon and Blade, target that, and then eventually just ultimate, because making a 9/9 Kraken every turn ain't so bad.
Absolutely not. Well, we're going to go to the sideboard here. Brian takes the first game off Danny Strunk. And this is, I think, where this matchup is going to, or I'm curious to see how it changes. In the past, the Mono Blue Devotion has really becomes an aggro control deck after sideboard. They board in something like 8 counter spells, you know, negates, gainsays, more Bidents, more Jaces, boards out all of its little creatures, and kind of becomes a one-threat counter spell deck.
Sure.
Now, what's interesting is that Brian's sideboard has he has options to transform here. I'm going to say, so he has the 4 Archangel of Thune. That's something that we saw in the Tomoharu Saito, Alex Hayne, Brad Nelson decks show up a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah.
But he's complementing it. He has 3 Brahmas and 3 Mistcutter Hydra. This is 10 full creatures that could all, in theory, be brought in here.
Yeah.
I don't know if you'd want all of them, but I'm curious, you know, is there a transformation going on here? Does he still become a control deck?
I mean, personally, I wouldn't even bother. I think that really you probably want Mistcutter Hydra, but your plan is already so good against them. They have such a tough time beating Jace into Supreme Verdict that I think that that's just what you want to be doing. But when you start casting spells like Brimaz or Archangel of Thune, your Supreme Verdicts become much worse. And there's a pretty high chance that either Archangel of Thune or Brimaz gets invalidated very quickly by something like Master Waves or Thassa. And only Mistcutter Hydra can really break through that kind of stalemate that board would create. So I could see him wanting to play the game where he starts jamming Brimaz and Archangel and then follows that up with Mistcutter Hydra, but it just makes the rest of his deck so much worse.
So in the past, even in pre-Born of the Gods, you didn't really like Archangel of Thune in the matchup.
Okay.
You didn't like Archangel out of the board pre-Born of the Gods?
I mean, I did like it out of the board, not necessarily in this matchup. I think it's fine. This is one particular aggressive matchup where Archangel doesn't necessarily win the game on its own against something like the aggressive red decks or like green-red monsters, decks that don't really have a lot of answers to it. I think it's much better, and also the life gain matters a lot more, whereas the blue decks,
Sure.
They're just going to kill you in one massive attack usually.
Yeah. I've talked, it's interesting, there's so many different opinions on this one. So I've talked to some players who really like the Archangel of Thune in the matchup because it gets around cards like Gainsay and Negate.
Sure.
You know, it's like, hey, if you can actually stick it against mono blue, it's good. Also, I do think there's something to be said that if you start, you still want to be a control deck at the end of the day. So, yeah.
I mean, sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you.
No, go ahead.
So I think that the problem with the mono blue deck becoming an aggro control deck is that you don't really have a Delver of Secrets type cards. We're stuck playing things like Judge's Familiar as our threats, Tidebinder Mage, Frostburn Weird. Frostburn Weird is not very good when you're having to hold up like
Sure.
2 mana every turn to protect like your opponent casting a Jace or a Sphinx Revelation. So it's going to be really interesting to see. I know he's definitely cutting Cloudfin Raptors. That's like
they cut Cloudfins.
go-to
They
number
usually
one.
cut Tidebinders, Cloudfins, and some number of Master Waves.
All right, well then, how are you killing them? How are you even turning on your your Thassas to actually win the game? That's my problem. So I mean, obviously, you have to find the perfect balance between sighting out the bad threats and bringing in the counter spells.
Right.
But when you dilute your deck this much, I don't understand how the deck actually has a game plan to win.
It looks like his game plan is 3 Gainsay, 2 Negate, 2 Jace, 2 Bident of Thassa. That'll be my guess here.
I mean, if the win condition is Jace, that's fine, but you still have to fight through 4 detention spheres, all these counter
Sure.
spells. It's going to be difficult regardless. I mean, I'm not saying that it can't be done. I'm not saying that it's a bad plan. I'm just saying that the more you dilute your deck in sideboarding, regardless of whether or not you think it's a good plan, diluting your main deck, especially one as focused as Mono Blue Devotion, where you're just trying to turn on Thassa, turn on Master Waves, the more things you take out that actually turn on those cards, the worse your deck becomes. You're just a collection of medium-sized bears that don't really do a whole lot.
How would you sideboard for the matchup then in a mono blue deck?
Personally, I hate Gainsay in general. I don't like playing that card on my sideboard. I like playing a pair of negates. I think the Planeswalkers are good. The Bidents are good. Bident with Essa is generally the way that I like to take control of the game, and that allows you to play more creatures and rely a little bit less on counter spells. You really only need negates for things like Elspeth and Sphinx's Revelation. Other than that, maybe Jace, but I just like playing some guys and hopefully landing a Bident on turn 4 and drawing a bunch of cards. He does have 2 more Bident with Essa in the sideboard to go along with the one in the main deck. Perhaps that's part of his plan.
Bident, I know that most players, especially if you've seen that in Sam Black's articles on the deck, he certainly says that he says Bident is pretty much one of the key cards in this matchup for the mono blue deck.
Yeah, and from Brian's side, it's going to be the card that he wants to see the least. I think he's okay with seeing a Jace on the other side of the table for at least a little while, because he knows that if his opponent taps out for a Jace, he's going to be able to tap out for something big, whether it be Kiora, Jace, or an Elspeth, and that's going to give him a window to do so. But I mean, I'm not sure. The mono blue player is going to have an uphill battle for sure.
Yeah. Well, all right. Well, we'll see what he's going to go with here. Brian to take a short break there, so we are back with Danny. Remember, will be on the play game 2 here. So he was down 1 game. These players are both sitting at 6-1. We're in an 8-round tournament, which means that it's going to take a record most likely of 9-1 from this position to make top 8. So the loser will be out of top 8 contention. The winner will still have some work to do, but certainly will be in a closer spot.
I don't want to bring up the old past or whatever, but you're never really out at X and 2 for sure. I've seen a lot of squeakers come in at the end at X and 2, so I've definitely gotten my fair share of 9th places at X 1 and 1. So
yeah,
nothing's a lock. Nothing's a lock.
Nothing's a lock.
Except EXO. I think
EXO's usually good.
10-0's probably good unless you get DQ'd. So
9-0's probably. Actually, I'll even go a step further. 9-0's probably good.
I don't know, man.
You could. I've never seen someone miss from 9-0 in a 10-round tournament.
That's reasonable. I have seen like 9-1s miss in a 10-round tournament.
I have seen that
on mostly on Magic Online. I think it happened once. I saw it once in real life at a Grand Prix in Paris, I think.
I remember there was one, and there was a big. That was an issue.
Sure.
It
was a PTQ in Paris a few years ago.
Yeah.
At a GP, I think, or something. It was like a huge PTQ. There was like just under the cutoff for an extra round, and there were 9 or 10 people who went X1 or better, and 2 of them missed, and it was a debacle.
It's designed to be a double elimination tournament.
Right. My problem with the whole, Swiss system, the way that they have like the cap numbers, why don't you just trim the number down on the number of people just a little bit on the rounds? It'll be very similar. But you'll just never have that problem if, let's say, you take 20 off of the cutoff or something.
That certainly seems reasonable to me.
That was my argument, but sorry.
Well, we are underway. Danny with a turn 1 Judge's Familiar, Brian with a tap land. Judge's Familiar, one of those cards that that they do sideboard into, and you see he has kept in Tidebinder Mages, and you'll be curving once again 1-1 into 2-2.
Yeah, Danny here pecking away with that Judge's Familiar. Brian really just digging for ways to interact early on. If he can, he's obviously going to survive to turn 4, but the question is whether or not Danny is going to have a Bident on turn 4 before Brian's able to cast Supreme Verdict. And if that's the case, Danny's going to lose some creatures on the board, but he's going to have a handful of cards still.
If you look at interestingly enough, if you look at the players' hands, both players have decided to board in Pithing Needle in this matchup.
Well, I don't really know what Brian's going to be naming with Pithing Needle. I guess maybe he suspects. Oh, actually, that's a reasonable conclusion. Yeah, Mutavault's definitely big. However, he doesn't know that Danny only has 2 Mutavaults in his list.
Oh, wow.
Danny opted to play a bunch more islands in order to have less of the super awkward draws between Nivell Spectre and Mutavault. I'm not sure I necessarily like that. The Nykthos in there, when you're cutting Mutavaults and still playing Nykthos, I feel like there's a problem.
Right. All right, well, we'll see a turn 3. Just more temples from Brian. That's 3 temples in 3 turns. No plays yet. But Danny also had no turn 3 play, so we'll pass back.
Yep. Danny here sitting on a Negate and a Pithing Needle and at least another land. I'm not sure what his last card is. But definitely putting a reasonable amount of pressure on Brian. And the real question is whether or not Brian has a Supreme Verdict or a Jace. But if he has Jace, it's going to get negated. If he has Supreme Verdict, it's going to buy him a ton of time.
Well, here's that aggro control plan, I guess, or at least what I've seen a lot of mono blue players on camera here do. It's they play about 3 power worth of creatures and sit back on counter spells and force the control deck to tap out.
Yeah, but the problem here is that if Brian does have Supreme Verdict and Danny just has a handful of counter spells, he's not going to be able to put any more pressure on Brian for a few turns, and that's going to allow Brian to eventually resolve one of his bigger threats.
So we're going to see the Supreme Verdict was made by Brian. Danny's going to have a follow-up. We'll see what it is.
Well, it looks like he has a Jace Architect of Thought, so he's going to be able to dig for some cards, but card advantage from the mono blue side is not really...
It's not as important.
Yeah, I mean, it's good. It's obviously good. You need to refuel, but you also need to apply pressure. And I think that Biden does a much better job at that. But it looks like here comes Jace Memory Adept. But Brian does have the Pithy Needle for it, so it's not going to be that big of a problem.
Yeah, that was interesting. The split was Night Veil Spectre, Frostburn Weird, Jace Memory Adept. Danny, confident enough in the Adept that he picked it over the other 2 cards put together.
I mean, that's reasonable. He obviously knows
that's his plan.
Yeah, I mean, his plan is to hopefully mill Brian out eventually and maybe have a counterspell backup or 2. But, well.
And that is a surprise. It's a Cloudfin Raptor also made on that turn. I have not normally seen that kept in.
Yeah, I mean, and that's one of the reasons why we said you should probably take it out because, I mean, if you look here, he's been Supreme Verdicted, and now he just needs any threat to follow up to actually make the Cloudfin Raptor into a threat. But it's not even going to be that big of a threat. So Cloudfin Raptor, definitely not a great card in this matchup. I know a lot of people have a tough time sideboarding against Ban. I tried to write as much as I can about very specific things that are good and bad in certain matchups, such as why Cloudfin Raptor is bad in the matchup, as opposed to this is a sideboarding guide. You know?
Right.
And I think it's important for people to just understand that cards that are only good if you overextend onto the board, such as Cloudfin Raptor.
Right. The problem is that you don't want to extend onto the board.
Right. You want threats that are standalone threats. You want Tidebinder Mage. You want Frostburn Weird. You don't want Cloudfin Raptor.
All right, well, we see Brian dipped into his sideboard there last turn as he cast Archangel of Thune. That card, a heavy lifter against Mono Blue, just because of how hard it is for Mono Blue to interact with the card.
Yeah, I mean, they don't really want to keep in the rapid hybridizations, you know, but maybe if Danny ends up taking this game from Brian, then maybe he brings back in the rapid hybridizations. Maybe Brian's like, well, I'll do the get you plan, and I'll sideboard out all my creatures, and then you have a bunch of dead cards in hand, so...
Well, this is a Jace cast from Danny. That's going to be a little bit of a hasty cast on his part. He did that before activating his first Jace, so he's going to miss the free cards off that one.
Yeah, I mean, the new Planeswalker rule is a little awkward. I guess in this situation, if it was the old Planeswalker rule, it'd be way worse, right? So
yeah, it's okay. The old Planeswalker rule, he'd lose them both. But he is going to miss a free minus, and that's going to set him pretty far back. Yeah, also, it looks like he does not have an answer to Archangel.
Yeah, Pithy Needle, I'm probably going to be naming Elspeth here if I had my guess.
Yeah, but
we'll get confirmation from
that. Yeah, he's answering cards in the dark, but there still is a problem that he doesn't have an answer for the cards in play. You're absolutely right. Elspeth Sun's Champion was the named card off Pithing Needle.
Yeah, and here Brian's actually going to draw a chump block from the Cloudfin Raptor because he's attacking the Jace. But unbeknownst to Danny, Brian does have Pith Needle and Detention Sphere in hand to take care of it, so it's not going to be too big of a problem.
It looks like his game plan was to chump and mill for 10. That's a pretty tenuous game plan, I would say, against a control deck, because you'd assume your opponent has some sort of way to interact with that.
Right, and Brian here is just taking full control of the game. He has a threat on the table, a Planeswalker that can be both a card advantage engine and a protective barrier against the rest of Danny's deck. Danny just left with a lonely negate in hand and not a whole lot to do with it.
Yeah, so Jace will -2. The split is Azorius Charm, another Jace, and a Temple.
Yeah, Brian's short on land, so definitely going to be taking the land and the Jace here. So.
Yep, so he goes ahead and does that, takes the Temple, scries off it. And now with 2 threats in play, it seems like Brian doesn't really need much more. He's successfully dealt with Danny's whole board, has a threat and a draw engine.
Yep, and just so happens to have Sphinx Revelation in hand, along with 4 more answers to everything Danny could ever do. And that's blue-white control. Yay!
Yep, that's just so Judge is familiar from Danny. That's not going to be good enough to stand up to the Angel.
Yeah.
Brian draws an Elspeth for the turn.
Currently locked down by the Pithy Needle on Danny, but not that he even needs it anyway. The Archangel of Thune plus Jace, definitely just going to be taking over this game. Brian going to be gaining a ton of life here.
Yep, Angel swings for 4. He's actually going to go ahead and swing at the Jace that he's needled.
Yeah, I mean, this is actually a heads-up play by Brian. He knows that he's got a complete lock on the game, and one of the easiest ways for him to lose is if Danny just has something like Cyclonic Rift or some way to get the Pithy Needle out of play, and then just mills him for 10 over the course of like a few turns before Brian can actually catch up. So even though he has like such a huge board advantage right now, and Danny here also negating Elspeth for
Which he's
almost
already
the exact
needled,
same,
yeah.
almost for the exact same reason. But this is one of the reasons why I don't like playing this really reactive role from the mono blue deck, because now you've wasted a Pithy Needle as a card, a negate as a card to deal with one Elspeth from Brian, and you have no real threats in play. And he still has the Cloudfin Raptors too. So I guess he probably sideboarded out all his Master Waves, but honestly, I don't really know how he can get out of this. There aren't a lot of cards in his deck list that can do that. But
Yeah, he's going to go ahead and take this opportunity while he knows Danny's whole hand to Revelation for 3. He's doing that pre-combat to get an extra counter on Archangel of Thune, which is now up to 6 power.
Plus, he did need to hit a land drop this turn, I believe. But.
Sure, absolutely. And that's going to come crashing in. Danny drawing, as you said, another Cloudfin Raptor. Not a good standalone threat. Not that many threats would be particularly helpful at this point.
Yeah, I mean, in this situation, he's too far behind, but I think it's just sort of like a coalescence of, having not like cards in your deck that aren't that great, as well as having a plan that doesn't really do what you want it to do.
Yeah, you don't want to overextend. So that's why you board in cards like Bident, so that if you get a Bident down, then suddenly Judge's Familiar becomes a must-kill, Frostburn Weird becomes a must-kill.
Yeah.
But even in that situation, Cloudfin Raptor isn't.
Yeah, and it's also important to note that since Danny is only playing 2 Mutavaults, Mutavault being one of the better cards in this matchup, and as you can see, one of the reasons Brian did bring in Pithy Needle. So.
Yeah, well, that will be the match. Braun-Duin 2-0 defeats Danny Strunk. He'll move up to 7-1. Danny will move down in 6-2. So Brian still looming for the top 8 spot in our standard open. Remember